Afternoon or evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, it's evening here. Thank you for joining me, Dorothy, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. Today I'm going to talk about some more about our culture post Charlie Kirk assassination, the way how this event happened and the aftermath of it and how people reacted. I'm going to get into that. So I'm going to start with yesterday. I saw some comments of, actually friends of mine on Facebook. One of them in particular, and then a couple others. The negativity had already started not long after Charlie Kirk had passed away. And so I always found that to be tactless and disrespectful. But they started to put out their memes or pictures of him and his quotes and you don't know how bad he was. He was he was anti-LGBTQ. He was a racist. He was a gun nut, or big Second Amendment, and he was okay with people dying from the guns. And although I think I'm not sure if that was out of context or what, even if it wasn't. I read it, and it seemed a bit harsh to me, but in any case, I'm not even sure if they used the last popular, regularly used word, a descriptive language, is that they didn't. I'm not sure if they used that one, but the other word that's always used is misogyny. In any case, apparently he's a racist. He's a gun nut. He's a prejudice, and apparently against because he said something about black people, which I think that actually had to do with DEI and merits and all that. And now I forgot what that's called. There was a thing that came out in the 90s, and I can't remember what it's called now. Just went away from my mind. No, actually, it was way before then that it came out, but it was to help against discrimination of minorities. So there's all this that was been thrown around about Charlie Kirk. They made him sound like he was Andrew Tate. Which there's no comparison. Even though I haven't watched very much of Charlie Kirk, whatever I did see from him, it just seemed like normal conservative talk. Andrew Tate, on the other hand, seems like a freaking predator and a creep. The man is sick, and yes, he is a misogynist. He is a thug. That's my view on him. But anyway, so I saw all these things. I was arguing with one of my Orthodox friends over this, which is really sad because I was like, I really don't think it's appropriate to be showing all this. But he hasn't even been buried yet, and all this. I think what I found out by what I heard, and listened to him. So I went out and I started listening to some of his stuff. I actually heard him today talking. It was a month ago. He had an interview with an Orthodox Christian priest. Can't remember his name now, the priest's name, but I watched portions of that. And he was getting, he was trying to get knowledge on that. He seemed open to all that, and, just fine. And then I saw, just about an hour ago, I saw his wife's speech live which was heart-wrenching. They come from a different tradition, Christian tradition, but I do believe that they were dedicated to Christ. And the way that, and his political views, I'm not talking about his faith, but his political views, he wasn't violently against. He wasn't like trying to throw LGBTQ people in jail. He wasn't trying to, take away their voices, as far as I know. The point is, everything that I have seen about his stances are just traditional conservative views, in my opinion. They don't seem any different than what most traditional conservatives think. So, I guess that's bigotry and prejudice and racism today. But I'll tell you, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was no such thing as politically correct. So you didn't have you got to, tiptoe around saying this or that. The people were pretty racist, and if you want to say that, and prejudiced in my era, and nobody was killed for it. People weren't being shot up because they said things that were not nice. Let's not forget in Idaho there was the neo-Nazis marching around in Coeur d'Alene. And there were some people that were neighbors in the area that were protesting that. But the government was like, this is the First Amendment right. No matter what the neo-Nazis say, they have the First Amendment right. They can go out there and they can blurt out whatever they want. We might find it heinous, but that's what free speech was. And so what I'm saying is, none of this was really that big of a deal. When I was growing up, you could say whatever you wanted to say, and but then again, there was less rancor back then. But but you still had people saying nasty things about other ethnic groups, and I'm not saying I agreed with any of it. I'm just saying it was happening, and nobody was shooting up people, okay? And there weren't, and schools there weren't mass shootings at schools when I was growing up. I grew up all in public schools. That was not happening. So I don't think we can use guns or say guns were or is the main issue of this. I think it has to do with the heart, the soul, the spiritual. I also think there are some issues with mental health, and I think that Kim Iverson has a good point on all the drugs that they have been putting children or kids and teens on for depression and SSRIs and depression. There's anxiety. The people they have a lot of things that they're on now, ADHD and all these things. And each person is going to be affected differently by the medicine. Okay, this is how I see it. In any case, what I'm saying is he didn't seem any different than a regular traditional conservative. And he was a polite conservative. He wasn't nasty or rude. He didn't come off that way. He wasn't, arrogant or anything like that. He wasn't a Mark Levin. He wasn't a Michael Savage, because I remember all that when I was a conservative. They were hardcore. So, no, he didn't come off like that. He wanted to talk to people and bring back discourse that has sorely been missed from this newer contemporary age. Okay, that's how I see it so far. Now, what this reminded me of, with all the divisions and everything, was the prophecies. But I will get into that in just a minute. I want to share a post by a friend of mine from Australia. I think she said some interesting things on this issue of faith, Charlie Kirk. She says, God will judge each one of us according to what we know. At least this man, who was not born into orthodoxy, was not afraid to speak publicly about the righteous word of our Lord and his teachings, which, let's be honest, we all fail to uphold. Yeah. At least this man spoke with passion and genuine love for Christ, unashamed to do so in large public forums, while many of us are too scared to even make the sign of the cross outside our homes, out of fear of being judged, mocked, or looked at strangely. Yep, I've been guilty of that. Yes, my friends, sadly, our faith has become colder than lukewarm. Yeah. We only seek God when we are depleted or in desperate need of something. We don't want him in our lives when we're around friends, colleagues, or especially certain family members. Our children don't understand the purpose of this life, nor do they know that there is a next life where we will be judged for not loving God sincerely. We are lost in terms of understanding why and how we were created. As a humanity, we are in many ways a lost cause. I have silently observed the disgraceful and ugly things even our people say online. I've seen Orthodox Christians on social media mocking Charlie, suggesting he's in hell simply because he wasn't an Orthodox Christian. Wow, that's not an Orthodox Christian tenet, I'll tell you that right now. No Orthodox is to judge where a person will end up when they leave this earth. That only God judges that. When did we, mere humans, become so bold as to make such claims about God's judgment? Yes. Then there are the senseless comments about the young man who was taken from us by those in power, silenced for one reason, to stop him once and for all. With his millions of followers, he was awakening the youth, people who, honestly, are the living dead, walking around without purpose. Charlie had the ability to bring them back to life by showing them the true meaning of existence, guiding them to Christ and offering them the promise of eternal life. We don't need more zombies wandering aimlessly. If I'm being completely honest, I would rather align myself with the Charlie Kirks of this world, people who live their beliefs and stand firm, than with the hypocrites who we sometimes see in our churches. The ones who, with their self-righteousness, destroy others with their words. I've lived long enough to witness the so-called pseudo-Christians who walk on their own terms, wearing a cross as a symbol, but not truly embracing the cross of Christ. If only I had even a fraction of Charlie's courage and his testimony to our Lord. Rest in peace, Charlie. I know you're in a special place alongside Andrew. Andrew's her son, and others I've lost who I know are with Christ. May God forgive us for our wretchedness. May St. John the Baptist guide us in true repentance. Our humanity is a diabolical mess because we've pushed God out of our lives and replaced him with our selfish desires. It's heartbreaking. May God awaken the living dead in all us and transform us into better souls we're meant to be. Time is running out for all of us. The clock is ticking and death is closer than we think. It's time to deeply, profoundly change our ways and stop blaming others for our failures, our bad choices, and the way we speak about others based on assumptions. As the saying goes, to assume makes an ass out of you and me. My Andrew always says, if you can't say something good about someone, say nothing at all. I thought that was a great post. Well said. We really have to work on, as I said, loving one another. And that's the hardest thing. And that's a commandment. That's one of the hardest things, isn't it? As a human and as a Christian. So another thing I want to say is this whole issue of what's going on with the back and forth with the left and the right. You know, I always think of it as a divisiveness by those who have the wealth and power to divide us peons, and so that we can fight amongst ourselves, and instead of keeping our eyes on these people who don't care about us. And I just want to, they're the ones in power. I'm going to show you what Alex Craner said yesterday on his thoughts on what happened with, and this of course is before we found out that, the killer was caught, and is in custody. So I just wanted to listen to his thoughts on this.
Like button to help us reaching more people. Alex, yesterday something so shocking happened in the United States. And we've learned that Charlie Kirk shot dead. And he was talking at the university campus. A lot of people there discussing and talking about many issues, social issues, political issues. And what has happened in the aftermath of what is this catastrophe was everybody was taking benefit from what has happened. And some were Israelis, those people who were supporting Israel said because he was supporting Israel, he was killed. Right, left, and what's your take? What's your understanding of this? Do we have right and left anymore? Is there anything there to separate people by? I don't see that. I don't see right and left. I don't see that in Europe. I don't see that in this country that I live in Brazil. I don't see that in the United States. I think it's so simple-minded to talk to somehow judge people based on right and left. It's much deeper than that. What's your take on that?
Well, I've thought for a very long time that left and right was a false dichotomy for a very long time because, I grew up in the communist world. In former Yugoslavia, under the one-party communist government, and in school we had to study Marxism. And, then I went to the West when I was 17, and, the rest of my education was very much capitalistic kind. And I studied economics in university, and then, I became an oil trader, and then I became a hedge fund manager. So I'm not a, how do you say it? I'm not partial to these ideological divides, but I also, the more you understand the actual issues at hand, the more you realize that they're completely false. People in the West think that they live in the capitalistic world, that places like Venezuela, like China, like former Soviet Union, Eastern countries, that they were socialist system. Actually, the systems were exactly the same. They were based on exactly the same monetary system. The differences were mainly about the division of, let's say, the nature of government spending. So in the systems that we call socialists, government spends bottom up, meaning the money is distributed to welfare programs, let's say more generous pensions plans, more generous healthcare, education, and things like this. Whereas in what we call capitalistic system, the government spending goes top down, meaning it's going to big corporations, primarily to the big banks, military industrial complex, big ag, big pharma, and so forth. They're all very, very heavily subsidized by the government, and nobody complains about it, because if the money goes already to the wealthy, let's call it corporate types and bondholders, then everybody thinks that's fantastic. That's how things should be. But basically, that is the difference. And I think that the whole left-right divide is just an ideological construct to keep people distracted by arguing the wrong issues. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed now that a lot of people reacted to the killing of Charlie Kirk as though this is leftist violence. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with leftist anything. Yeah. The conflict, it always, this is very important to keep in mind, and you and I have discussed this more than once. The conflict is between two systems of governance. And those two systems of governance are the oligarchic Western colonialist approach, which is always directed at building an empire of colonies around the world. And then the other side is pretty much the rest of humanity. Both, countries like Russia, China, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, and so forth. But also the domestic populations, because, if the domestic populations are not not friendly to this oligarchic system of government, which is prevalent, particularly in Western Europe, in the old colonialist nations like France and Britain primarily, but then also Holland, Germany, and some others. Then this system cracks down on their own populations as well, which, we see everywhere around. We've just had very violent clashes between French protesters and French police, which is a regular recurrence. We saw the same in France. The AfD party, which is not friendly to the globalist system, they just
Germany.
had 14 of their candidates
That's
in one
Germany,
region
yeah.
Die suddenly in the space of 2 weeks, which is, statistically almost impossible. We've had in France the opposition of Assemblée Nationale, led by Marine Le Pen. Basically, she was forbidden by French courts from participating in presidential elections. We had assassination attempt against Robert Fico. We had disqualification of Calin Georgescu in Romania, and so on and so on. And what do all these people have in common? They are interested in their nation's sovereignty. They want to regain their nation's sovereignty. And in that, they are in opposition to the globalist system of these Western European oligarchies, which are also present, by the way, in other places like Japan, like the United States, and so on. They have their satellites all over the place. Wall Street is one of the most powerful satellites of this oligarchic system, which is always, by the way, based rooted in the money lending oligarchies. It's not just any old kind of oligarchies. It's particularly the money lenders, the banking cartel, the too big to fail banks, people who control them. This is not, this is hidden. So, sometimes people will say like, well, why don't you name names? Well, I don't know what the names are, because these names are kept hidden, and not even US Congress can get those names to know who exactly they're dealing with. But we know that, certain families turn up all the time, like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Mellons, Fairchilds, and so on and so forth. So we know a little bit about it, but it's all vague and foggy. But this is the opposition, it's the oligarchies of the Western European and powers and the United States opposed to everybody else.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And I think that's what's going on here. I think these people, these oligarchs, these globalist oligarchs, elites, the people with all the power and money, distract us with, they'll put out their bots to cause infighting in each country, the people, the regular citizens, so that they are fighting each other instead of coming together to stand up against these oligarchs. And, Jimmy Dore talks about this a lot, and I agree with him on this issue. So I thought that was really good what he was saying. It made a lot of sense. Well said, and of course. And so I wanted to share that with you because I agree with him. Now, another thing is that when this aftermath of this terrible assassination, things that came immediately to my mind were the prophecy of the U.S. And it was, let's see if I can find it, this particular one. So this is the elder that's anonymous. He said, the fall of a great American empire will commence with a widespread uprising and will ultimately be completed by a devastating earthquake along the San Andreas Fault. He said that in 2020. So, 5 years ago, not very long ago. And if we remember correctly, this happens around the time when, if you go through the chronological thing that I was going through yesterday, that was when Russia descends down towards Turkey and that after that, shortly after they get there, and then there's the big Turkey-Russia war battle, whatever you want to call it, that happens without any real restraint, because this is the time that apparently America is going to be going through those geological catastrophes. Both sides, as Metropolitan Neophyte has said, there's going to be tsunamis on the shores, and then here, the natural disasters and all this with the earthquakes and the volcanoes and all that. But it starts with the uprising, and this is what I was thinking. I was like, I wonder if this is a trigger of future uprising of what he's talking about here, which eventually he says after this.
On January 29th, 2021, the elder provided further clarification, stating, "In America, great and terrible events will unfold, possibly igniting widespread unrest among the people. Yes, even a civil war. If such a conflict erupts, it will not remain within the traditional political framework, but..."
Yeah, see, and again, this plays into what they're trying to do, and they have been trying to do this for decades, but it's even worse now. And regarding pitting your neighbor against you, okay? And so that's what they're saying here.
Across racial, religious, and ideological divisions, affecting groups such as whites and blacks, Christians and Muslims, and other societal factions. The consequences will be severe, with immense losses stemming from the fury that will surge through the population. This anger, driven by political, religious, and racial tensions, will culminate in devastation. Nature itself will respond, with destruction emerging from the San Andreas Fault. In June 2021, the elder made the following statement: "To prevent a conflict in the Black Sea Crimea region between Russian and NATO forces, a civil war may erupt in America, an inevitable uprising, whether now or later."
Okay, so he's saying here that the Black Sea Crimea region between Russian and NATO forces. Well, didn't Elder Joseph say something about there was going to be the air fight, though Americans don't win that one in the Black Sea area? And here he's saying, this elder is saying, between Russian and NATO forces, a civil war may erupt in America, an inevitable uprising, whether now or later. Yeah, it's inevitable, as we can see. And you can see this bubbling up. It's going to reach a boiling point. Unfortunately, instead of calming down, it just seems to be escalating each day, each week, each month, each year in this country. So I just wanted to remind everybody about this, because it came to my mind, because this was a pretty big event. I really feel like something really shifted. I know maybe it's just how it may sound crazy, but I feel like things have shifted a bit in my country since this happened. And I'm sure people in the 60s probably felt like that. Can you imagine growing up in the 60s when so many leaders were shot dead, were assassinated? I mean, that must have been, you must have thought it was the end of the world then with all that was going on. But here, in this era, this is probably, as people have said, the most significant in current modern history, after that, after those times in the 60s. So, I don't know, but this just came to my mind during this. And we don't want more division, do we? We want, I want the discourse back that I grew up with, where people didn't speak that way of, toward people in such a way of, wanting everybody to rot in hell, or, to be killed. I mean, people think they're living in a video game, cheering for people's death, and then when they actually see it, which I wish they wouldn't show those things, I don't think they're living in reality, that they really understand what's going on. that a life is really gone, has been extinguished. I think the younger generations who are so immersed in these games, I think sometimes they just can't tell when fantasy ends and reality begins, or vice versa. So, I have one other video to show you that I think is an important video. And I'm just going to say, I'll bring it up. It's Bernie Sanders had a small speech today, and I'm going to share it with you. And yeah, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of things, and some things I agree with Bernie on, and other things I don't. But in this video, I'll just have you listen. It's less than 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for joining me. I want to say a few words regarding the terrible murder yesterday of Charlie Kirk, someone who I strongly disagreed with on almost every issue, but who was clearly a very smart and effective communicator and organizer, and someone unafraid to get out into the world and engage the public. My condolences go out to his wife and his family. A free and democratic society, which is what America is supposed to be about, depends upon the basic premise that people can speak out, organize, and take part in public life without fear, without worrying that they might be killed, injured, or humiliated for expressing their political views. In fact, that is the essence of what freedom is about and what democracy is about. You have a point of view, that's great. I have a point of view that is different than yours. That's great. Let's argue it out. We make our case to the American people at the local, state, and federal levels, and we hold free elections in which the people decide what they want. That's called freedom and democracy. And I want as many people as possible to participate in that process without fear. Freedom and democracy is not about political violence. It is not about assassinating public officials. It is not about trying to intimidate people who speak out on an issue. Political violence, in fact, is political cowardice. It means that you cannot convince people of the correctness of your ideas, and you have to impose them through force. Every American, no matter what one's political point of view may be, must condemn all forms of political violence and all forms of intimidation. We must welcome and respect dissenting points of view. That's what our Constitution is about. That's what our Bill of Rights is about. That, in fact, is what freedom is about. The murder of Charlie Kirk is part of a disturbing rise in political violence that threatens to hollow out public life and make people afraid of participating. From the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol, to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, to the attack on Paul Pelosi, to the attempted kidnapping of Michigan Governor Whitmer, to the murder of Minnesota's Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, to the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, to the shooting of United Health Executive Brian Thompson, and the shooting several years ago of Representative Steve Scalise, this chilling rise in violence has targeted public officials across the political spectrum. Sadly, this is not a new phenomenon. We all remember the assassinations of President Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Senator Robert F. Kennedy, John Lennon, Medgar Evers, and the attempted assassinations of President Ronald Reagan and Alabama Governor George Wallace. This is a difficult and contentious moment in American history. Democracy in our country and throughout the world is under attack. And there are a lot of reasons for that which need serious discussion. But bottom line, if we honestly believe in democracy, if we believe in freedom, all of us must be loud and clear. Political violence, regardless of ideology, is not the answer. and must be condemned.
Yes, well, as I said, I think that was a really good I think it was a really good speech by Bernie Sanders. I mean, you may not agree with everything he was saying. He's listening in there, but the core message is exactly right, in my opinion. And it was really nice to see that, and I appreciated that. I wanted to share it because I think that's what we need in this country. We need to go back to that, as I said. And I think that's what Charlie was trying to do, go back to that type of discourse. So I hope you had this was informative and you got something out of it. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this and your opinions, your feelings on this, and what's all been going on. I mean, how could we not, as Americans? We're in this is affects all of us, really. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for following my channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, and I wish you a blessed day, evening, afternoon. Until next time.